On a bright morning, many people were going about their activities, taking care of the house, heading to work, and also going to school. At one of the train stations, students getting off the train to go to school could be seen exiting the station. This included a young man with his old brown hair, named Shiratori, who also got off at that train station. A slight feeling of awkwardness still lingered in his heart because today was his first day entering high school. But seeing the students in front of him, there were two girls wearing the same uniform as Shiratori, which made him feel a bit calmer because both girls also had ribbons on their chests indicating they were new students like him. Seeing other students walking in the same direction as him, Shiratori only then realized that his upperclassmen were also wearing the same uniform as the first-year students. Looking at his upperclassmen, a youthful imagination popped into Shiratori's head about the perfect girl who would save him because he had successfully entered the school, which made Shiratori smile to himself and start feeling excited, muttering in his heart that he already felt his high school life would be full of beautiful flowers. Not long after, Shiratori felt something bumping into him along with a soft voice apologizing. Of course, this made Shiratori a little surprised and he turned toward it, seeing a girl in the same uniform as him who was reading a book from a close distance. Strangely, the girl continued reading her book even though she had just bumped into Shiratori, and she also had a rather small stature for a high school student. After apologizing, the girl remained focused on her book and walked without looking at the road, which left Shiratori himself confused by her behavior. He even thought for a moment that the girl was an elementary school kid cosplaying or dressing up as a high school student. Since they were walking in the same direction, Shiratori ended up following her from behind the short girl. Shiratori even admitted that the longer he observed the short girl, the more he realized just how small she was. They then crossed a pedestrian bridge, and suddenly a wind blew from below, causing an unexpected incident. The girl's skirt flipped up, shocking Shiratori immensely and revealing its color. Worse yet, the wind didn't stop and kept blowing along the way, to the point that people passing by were also shocked upon noticing it. Even worse, the short girl seemed either indifferent or unaware of it, and instead focused on the book in her hand. Because of this, Shiratori was utterly shocked by her apathetic nature, giving him his first impression of the short girl as someone who couldn't socialize and an elementary school kid with no sense of caution. Shiratori even questioned how the short girl could walk without looking at the road. Just as he pondered that in his head, the two of them reached the end of the pedestrian bridge. And when the short girl was about to descend the stairs, her body suddenly dropped unnaturally. Her foot slipped. This shocked Shiratori greatly, and in a panic, he quickly ran toward her and caught her body right away. Because the incident happened so quickly and Shiratori moved on reflex, he didn't have time to balance his body. Fortunately, after strengthening his footing, Shiratori managed to secure his balance, preventing both of them from falling down the stairs. However, this also made the short girl surprised, and she accidentally dropped her bag and the book she was reading. The short girl let out a sigh of relief because nothing happened and for a moment turned backward, then leaned back. On the other hand, Shiratori struggled with all his might against the pain and weakness because his back muscles were working hard to support the heavy load from holding the short girl's body. Without realizing it, Shiratori's hand was placed in a spot it shouldn't be. But since his main goal was to prevent them from falling, the only thing on his mind was to hold on with all his strength so the short girl wouldn't fall, making his grip even tighter. It took a few moments for Shiratori to realize there was a strange sensation in his hand. Seeing the short girl's reaction strengthened Shiratori's guess, as the short girl stared at him with a look of embarrassment mixed with anger. The little girl started squirming and struggling, forcing Shiratori to release her body. Of course, Shiratori panicked because the short girl's actions could make both of them fall together. When Shiratori managed to take a step back, he let out a sigh of relief and began lowering her body. After being set down, with a flushed face full of embarrassment and emotion, the short girl immediately struck a pose ready to attack Shiratori. Of course, Shiratori was shocked to see it, but the short girl paused and turned her face away while lowering her arms. With a shy and still emotional tone, the short girl said that because Shiratori had saved her, she would forgive him. With a confused and disbelieving expression, Shiratori instead asked back if what the short girl meant was him. Then, with an emotional and very embarrassed tone, the short girl turned her body and said that it really hurt when Shiratori gripped her assets so hard like that. Shiratori's face instantly turned red and shocked because what he had suspected earlier turned out to be true. Awkwardly and shocked, Shiratori immediately apologized to the short girl. Without turning toward Shiratori, and with her face still showing remnants of anger and her cheeks flushed, the short girl replied in a softer tone than before that she didn't mind it, and that she also liked his scent. Shiratori's eyes widened in confusion after hearing the short girl's last sentence. The short girl then quickly ran away in embarrassment and thanked Shiratori. Shiratori stood there for a few moments, confused about the meaning of the short girl's last sentence. But he snapped back to reality, realizing he might be late for the school entrance ceremony, and quickly ran in the same direction as the short girl. That day, 15-year-old Shiratori realized that he had saved someone's life, but he hadn't yet realized that he had set off an unexpected event for his future. On a bright April morning, under a calm blue sky, the school entrance ceremony was held without any issues. Cherry blossoms gently fell, adorning the first day of school for hundreds of new students. The students exited the auditorium area where the ceremony had been held earlier and began returning to their respective classrooms. The same went for Shiratori, who walked to his class and knew that this was the time to meet his classmates. When he opened the classroom door, many of his classmates were there. Some were sleeping, talking with other friends, and more. But among all that, Shiratori's eyes were drawn to someone. Yes, the short girl he had just saved that morning turned out to be his classmate. On the other hand, seeing Shiratori enter the class, the short girl was utterly shocked, to the point that the book she was reading fell, and her face turned red. Shiratori approached her and, awkwardly scratching his head, greeted the short girl and intended to greet her back more formally. But because she was too embarrassed from the earlier incident, the short girl started acting flustered and, without thinking, picked up her book again and covered her face with it while bowing her head. The two of them were truly speechless, caught between shock and immense embarrassment. Seeing the short girl's reaction, the students in the class started thinking strange things about Shiratori, assuming he was bullying the short girl. Of course, Shiratori was shocked by that assumption and immediately denied it, struggling to explain the real situation to them. It was like fate that the two of them had to meet again. Days passed, and before he knew it, a week had gone by. During that time, Shiratori felt like nothing had changed or was different from his usual days. Opening his phone, Shiratori felt like there was still some time left. While Shiratori was looking at his phone, on the other hand, the short girl sitting in the back row peeked at Shiratori from the edge of her book. Her gaze was so sharp that Shiratori often turned back to check, but he didn't notice because the short girl always quickly hid behind her book when Shiratori turned. This left Shiratori confused and thinking that all the feelings of gazes directed at him were just his imagination. After a week had passed, Shiratori now knew the short girl's name. She was Ijima Kanon, the short girl with long, soft hair, who had high awareness and loved books. She earned the nickname, the little animal, from Class 1B because of her body size, and of course, she was quite popular. Not long after Kanon hid behind her book, a girl with short black hair approached her and called her with a soft and cheerful tone. Kanon seemed startled upon hearing it. She was Nemuko, a girl with an innocent face. Nemuko asked Kanon why she looked so concentrated and where she was looking. Kanon panicked and awkwardly replied, while showing the contents of her book, that she was just reading it. The book Kanon was holding was upside down, which of course made it impossible for a normal person to read, causing Nemuko to smile and pat Kanon's head, while Kanon herself was confused by her action. Not long after, another girl sitting beside the two of them suddenly let out a quite surprised sound. She then approached the two of them and told them that she had found something amazing. She was Sayuki, a girl with a standout appearance in her typical Jairu style, complete with blonde hair, nail polish, and accessories like a ribbon around her neck. Hearing that, Kanon put down her book, and Nemuko asked what Sayuki had just found. Sayuki smiled slightly and handed her phone to Kanon. When Kanon received it and saw the contents of the phone, her body jolted in shock upon seeing it, as did Nemuko, who was shocked but more naturally. Kanon's face turned red upon seeing it, because what was on the phone was an ad for swimsuits on discount. Sayuki commented that it looked cute. Nemuko joined in commenting that she had seen a Jainin, or entertainer, wearing that swimsuit. Sayuki then played with her hair and asked Kanon if her haircut wasn't quite messy, and in her opinion, it must be hard to manage such a haircut. On the other hand, Kanon looked shyly smiling with a few strands of hair sticking out from the flow of her other hair. Nemuko noticed it, but didn't want to offend Kanon and awkwardly commented that maybe Kanon's hair was like that because it was her natural hair. Sayoki nodded and stared at Namuko for a few moments from top to bottom. Seeing Sayoki's eyes scanning her body from top to bottom made her shyly ask if there was something wrong with her appearance. Sayoki then commented that she was sure Namuko did some hair treatment and pointed downward. The question made Namuko embarrassed and with a shocked tone asked what hair Sayoki meant just now. Sayoki didn't answer and instead invited Namuko to go to the salon with her. Namuko, still with the same tone, questioned the meaning of Sayoki's earlier words, and Sayoki replied that going to the salon was a form and proof of their maturity. Hearing that, Kanon looked a bit surprised. Sayoki then called Kanon and intended to invite her too, commenting while holding a strand of Kanon's hair that Kanon's cat-like and soft hair looked cute. But not long after saying that, Kanon's expression suddenly became flat and she furrowed her brow, causing Sayoki's hand to freeze in shock upon seeing it. For a few moments, Sayoki and Namuko exchanged glances in surprise at Kanon's reaction just now, realizing that they seemed to have offended Kanon with their words. Namuko sighed to calm herself before trying to soothe Kanon by saying that Kanon could still develop, and maybe one day would grow very thick hair. Yes, their conversation was drifting further. On the other hand, Shiratori, who overheard their conversation, immediately bowed his head in embarrassment after hearing the three of them talking there, commenting in his heart that those girls were amazing. Not long after, Shiratori's two male friends approached him and greeted him. One of them asked if Shiratori had decided which club he would choose to join, and they also invited Shiratori to check out the school clubs together. Shiratori then snapped out of his bowed position and awkwardly declined their invitation. At the same time, Shiratori also remembered the incident at the beginning of school, where he met a girl with long black hair who greeted Shiratori with a soft tone and seemed like they had known each other for a long time. The girl saved him and expressed her surprise because Shiratori really entered the same school as her. There was even a moment when the girl came and apologized for accidentally knocking off the flower on Shiratori's clothes. Even though Shiratori didn't mind it, the girl knelt down to pick it up and then reattached it to Shiratori's clothes. Awkwardly, Shiratori asked the girl, who was his upperclassman, if she was still in the swimming club. The girl replied that now she was part of the student council organization. Back to the present, because of that incident, Shiratori told his friends that he intended to join the student council organization. Hearing that, his two friends looked a bit surprised and impressed. One of them commented that Shiratori's chosen plan sounded heavy, but they didn't mind Shiratori rejecting their invitation. Shiratori also apologized to them for declining. His friends were so friendly and didn't mind it. Looking back at his phone, Shiratori looked surprised upon finding a message and told his friends that it was time for him to go home. Seeing Shiratori in such a hurry, one of them asked if Shiratori had an appointment to meet someone. Shiratori, in a hurried tone, said that he had a meeting with his wife. One of his friends casually justified Shiratori's hurried behavior. While watching Shiratori leave in a rush, one of his friends turned to his companion and commented that if you have an appointment with your wife, you have no other choice. But when he saw his companion's reaction with his mouth agape in shock, the questioning friend paused and only then reacted in shock that Shiratori was going to meet his wife at the age of 15. Yes, he was late in realizing it. On the other hand, Shiratori ran on the sidewalk, and after a few moments, he saw a woman waiting outside the station. The woman turned toward Shiratori and greeted him with a smile on her face. Shiratori looked awkward and immediately bowed 90 degrees when greeting her. This made the woman laugh softly in surprise at his 90-degree pose. The woman was named Haruno. Haruno then smiled and held Shiratori's hand, then softly told Shiratori that he didn't need to be so formal and polite toward her because soon she would become Shiratori's mother. Shiratori smiled awkwardly and started walking with her. They chatted lightly along the way. Deep in his heart, Shiratori didn't expect that a woman as beautiful as Haruno would become his father's wife, and he admitted that Haruno was beautiful. Not long after, Haruno apologized to Shiratori for having to help her resolve her issue, which should have been her own responsibility, especially to the point of disturbing Shiratori's school time. Haruno explained that all of this wasn't according to plan because of her daughter's antics. Haruno then told Shiratori that she was sure Shiratori would meet her daughter today because she had kept Shiratori's arrival to her home a secret until today. Hearing that, Shiratori was happily surprised but also scared because Haruno had a strong desire to keep it secret from her daughter all this time. Haruno explained that it wasn't that her daughter strictly forbade her from remarrying. It's just that her daughter was quite shy. Shiratori nodded in understanding and said that Haruno's daughter was still a little girl, so it wasn't good to force something. Even so, he would do his best to have a good relationship with his new little sister. This made Haruno happy and silent for a few moments. When she was about to tell Shiratori about her daughter, suddenly Haruno's phone rang, stopping her, and she quickly answered the call. When she realized the call was from the company where she worked, Haruno excused herself to step away and continued the call. But from Haruno's response, Shiratori knew that something unwanted had happened, and sure enough, Haruno with a panicked expression asked Shiratori to go to her house first because she would return to the office. Haruno immediately gave her house key to the still confused and shocked Shiratori. Haruno left right away after telling him that her daughter usually wouldn't come home at this hour. On the other hand, Shiratori was very shocked that he was really left behind and had to go home alone. On the other hand, at Haruno's house, a girl who was none other than Kanon could be seen standing behind the door after entering the house and pausing there while still thinking about her conversation with her classmates regarding hair. Looking at her reflection in the large mirror near the house entrance, Kanon paused for a moment with a slightly annoyed but also curious expression. She quickly hurried into her room and took off her school jacket. In her heart, Kanon kept affirming that it wasn't that she was thinking about it or not, but she was just having trouble confirming it. In the end, Kanon really checked it directly using a small mirror in her room, but since she still couldn't find any signs, Kanon thought maybe using the large mirror could help her. Because of that, she quickly went to the house entrance where the large mirror was. She checked it right there, and unfortunately, at that exact moment, Shiratori entered her house. The two of them stared at each other with shocked and puzzled expressions, before then panicking, and Shiratori reflexively turned his face toward the mirror to avoid the sight that shouldn't be there. But because of that, it actually made Shiratori see it more clearly through the reflection in the mirror, instantly making Shiratori's face turn red. Following Shiratori's gaze, Kanon quickly covered her legs, and her face turned very red to the point of almost fainting. Out of embarrassment, Kanon quickly stood up in an unfavorable condition and kept uttering unclear words in an angry tone. But because her standing position wasn't good, she suddenly lost her balance and fell. This time, Shiratori didn't have time to save her and saw Kanon fall. But that actually exposed her even more, shocking Shiratori immensely. His head was spinning from all these sudden events. From Haruno suddenly leaving to the current incident. Snapping out of his thoughts, Shiratori quickly took off his jacket and covered Kanon with it right away. Shiratori squatted down and asked Kanon if the little girl mentioned by Haruno was Kanon. Hearing her mother's name, Kanon was utterly shocked. Seeing Kanon's reaction allowed Shiratori to confirm that Haruno's daughter was Kanon. Kanon then, with a confused tone, questioned the word little girl from Shiratori's earlier statement. Shiratori looked confused about how to explain it, but said that he never imagined his father would marry the mother of his classmate. With a shocked tone, Kanon tried to guess that her mother's current partner was Shiratori's father. Shiratori nodded and explained that all this time Kanon had been avoiding him, right? And Kanon's mother explained that this week was busy with handling the house move and such. With a guilty tone, Kanon explained that besides not knowing about this, the reason she avoided Shiratori was that she still wasn't used to her mother suddenly telling her they would get a new family. Shiratori smiled and nodded in understanding because he felt the same way. But suddenly, Kanon was shocked and immediately put on an angry expression with her red face and approached Shiratori until she fell. Of course, this shocked Shiratori. With her face close, Kanon asked if moving meant she would live together with Shiratori, right? For a few moments, Shiratori paused in shock upon seeing Kanon's face so close to him before confirming it. Remembering the recent incident, Shiratori explained in a slightly panicked and embarrassed tone that everything would be fine because they would live together with their parents. Hearing that, Kanon's expression softened and was replaced with an admiring one, muttering that now she had a brother figure she could ask for help from. On the other hand, Shiratori looked like he was closing both his eyes because he felt embarrassed with Kanon's face being too close. But after a few moments, Shiratori opened his eyes a little to look and instead saw Kanon putting on an angry expression, almost crying from embarrassment. This of course shocked and panicked Shiratori. With a trembling tone from embarrassment, Kanon said her feelings of embarrassment were very problematic if the two of them deepened their relationship this quickly. Especially since Shiratori had seen her earlier, so she couldn't get married anymore. Hearing that, Shiratori, with his flushed face, immediately apologized to Kanon. Shiratori explained in a panicked tone that Kanon shouldn't feel hurt because she was seen by someone like him who would become part of her family. Moreover, in his opinion, Kanon was cute, so he was sure Kanon would find someone suitable for her. Hearing that, her angry expression softened, and she averted her gaze for a few moments before then bringing her body closer to Shiratori. Of course, this shocked Shiratori, and he asked about her condition. Kanon paused for a few moments before standing up and saying that she understood Shiratori had someone he liked, but Shiratori also had to take responsibility for the earlier incident. With a high tone and an expression holding back embarrassment, Kanon said that until she got a boyfriend, Shiratori had to be her boyfriend when at home. An indirect statement that was so shocking that Shiratori was stunned and confused about how to respond. He was so confused that in his heart, he asked what he should do to his beloved upperclassman. On the other hand, inside the school, Shiratori's beloved upperclassman could be seen walking in the hall with report papers in both hands. Then her friend came and called her by name, Kanoka. Her friend commented that Kanoka was busy as usual as the student council president. Kanoka smiled and replied that this busyness made her happy because the first-year students this year, in her opinion, were very good. A few days passed, and in the morning, Kanon could be seen helping her mother prepare breakfast in the kitchen, stirring natto. Haruno then asked her daughter to wake up Shiratori. For a moment, Kanon paused and suddenly, in a surprised tone, asked about it again. Her mother, who was arranging the food on the table, nodded and asked Kanon to tell him that it was time for breakfast. Kanon looked restless and with a hesitant and embarrassed tone, asked again even though Shiratori was asleep. The question was quite ambiguous. Since Haruno knew her daughter was shy, she smiled at her reaction and replied that that's why Kanon had to wake him up. With her flushed face, Kanon started jumping up and down on each foot, showing how embarrassed she was, and even wanted to refuse. With an embarrassed expression, Kanon said that her entering a boy's room felt strange. On the other hand, on the second floor, Shiratori had just woken up from his sleep. As soon as he opened his eyes, the first thing on his mind was wondering where he was now. After pausing for a few moments, Shiratori remembered that this was his new room, and on Friday night, they had celebrated a family dinner party at a restaurant. That night, Haruno apologized to Shiratori for forgetting to tell him that he would be living with a girl his age. Shiratori, in an awkward tone, replied that he didn't know if he was surprised or not. Kanon, with her pouting face, also commented to her mother that she hadn't heard about this before either. Haruno replied that Kanon hadn't heard about it because she always ran away from the topic. Shiratori's father then told Haruno not to apologize because they were now a family. Hearing that, Shiratori looked at his father with a slightly surprised and admiring gaze because his father could say that so easily. Haruno then asked Shiratori to get along well with Kanon because she would be Shiratori's sister. After that dinner, the four of them started packing their things and moving houses on their holidays. In his still sleepy state, Shiratori was not yet used to the entirely new atmosphere, the new room and his new family. Suddenly, the memory of when he found out that his stepsister was Kanon came back, where Kanon asked him to be her boyfriend at home until she got her own boyfriend. This immediately made Shiratori fully awake, his eyes wide open. His heart pounded fast just thinking about it. Shiratori even tried closing his eyes again to calm himself. However, that only made him sleepy again, and he chose to go back to sleep. On the other hand, Kanon had just reached the second floor. Her steps were full of hesitation as she approached Shiratori's bedroom door. Even when standing in front of the door, Kanon paused there with a flushed, hesitant face but gathered her courage. After standing there for a few moments, Kanon raised her hand and knocked on the door once. Yes, just once, really only one time. The atmosphere became silent, and Kanon felt that Shiratori wasn't responding, so she had no choice but to enter his room. Kanon opened Shiratori's bedroom door very slowly and carefully, like a thief. When entering the room, Kanon's expression changed to relaxed and looked curious as well as nostalgic. In Shiratori's room, there were still some unpacked cardboard boxes. Looking around, Kanon commented in her heart that this room used to be a storage room, but now it felt so warm after being occupied by Shiratori. Looking toward the bed, Shiratori was seen sleeping soundly. Realizing that, Kanon approached him, and a mischievous idea popped into her head, making her smile naughtily. With a quick hand movement, Kanon pulled his blanket and threw it up while shouting to wake Shiratori, but only one word came out of her mouth. Her words stopped immediately when Shiratori's distinctive scent reached her. It even made Kanon sit down right there and rest her head beside Shiratori's bed. Kanon immediately sank into her thoughts upon realizing that she liked Shiratori's scent. At the same time, the thrown blanket fell back down, covering Kanon. Not long after, Shiratori woke up only to find Kanon trapped in his blanket. Suddenly, Kanon emerged from the blanket in a panic, and of course, this shocked Shiratori as well. Kanon's face turned very red upon realizing that Shiratori was awake and saw her like that. In a panic, Kanon quickly ran away while telling Shiratori to come down soon because breakfast was ready. Shiratori paused for a few moments to process the incident at the start of his morning before heading downstairs. After all that, they finally had breakfast together. In a happy tone, Haruno commented that this was their first family breakfast. In an embarrassed and awkward tone, Shiratori apologized to his parents for oversleeping. Haruno laughed softly and didn't mind it. During breakfast, Shiratori observed his father, who also looked awkward even though he liked to act as if he wasn't in front of his son. Shiratori also wondered in his heart how Kanon ended up in his blanket that morning, but his thoughts were suddenly diverted to Kanon's mouth as she ate. He was so distracted that Shiratori didn't hear Kanon calling him until she called again in a high tone with his full name. Shiratori was startled and snapped back to reality, responding spontaneously. With a flat and slightly angry expression, Kanon ordered Shiratori to get the soy sauce bottle near him. Awkwardly, Shiratori obeyed. Seeing their children's behavior made Haruno look a bit worried and immediately scolded her daughter, asking in a slightly reprimanding tone how she could call Shiratori like that. Hearing the scolding from her mother, Kanon innocently asked if that wasn't his name. Her mother shook her head and replied that wasn't the issue. Kanon should call Shiratori Oniai-chan or brother. Instantly, Shiratori, who was drinking soup from his bowl, spat it back out in shock. On the other hand, Kanon froze in surprise until her chopsticks fell onto the table. Haruno explained that it was very strange to call family members by their full names. Kanon's face instantly turned red, and she asked even though they were the same age. Having no other choice, Kanon, with her embarrassed expression, said that if it had to be like that, then she wanted to be called Wani-chan by Shiratori. Hearing that, Haruno commented that it might be hard for Kanon. Kanon, in a high and embarrassed tone, explained that even though she wanted her head to be patted like a little sister, she also wanted to be a big sister figure. Hearing that, Shiratori furrowed his brow in confusion, trying to understand and imagine it. Shiratori paused for a few moments and suddenly commented that he decided to agree and consider Kanon as Ain, or his big sister. Haruno and Shiratori's father smiled upon hearing it. On the other hand, Kanon looked half-dead shocked because she was defeated outright by Shiratori's mature nature that could yield. In a trembling and embarrassed tone, Kanon asked Shiratori what date he was born on. Innocently, Shiratori replied that his birthday was on May 6th. Yes, the match was won by Shiratori in just a few seconds, and Kanon lost with her birthday on February 22nd. Kanon should have been the older one, but because of her shy nature and being more suited as a little sister, she realized it. Because of that, Kanon could only hold back her embarrassment with a flushed face, not wanting to lose but also self-aware. Seeing that, Shiratori, confused by the result, was shocked and reaffirmed that that's why he would be Kanon's little brother. However, Haruno laughed softly and said it was fine for Shiratori to be Kanon's big brother. Kanon, in an embarrassed tone, told her mother that she couldn't use that call now. Her mother laughed softly and let her daughter adapt to their new family. Then, Shiratori realized that now he shouldn't call Kanon by her full name. Besides, the papers for their new family would be completed this week. So now he had to call Haruno Oka-san, or mother, while for Kanon's name, Shiratori paused for a few moments thinking about it before suddenly calling Kanon by her last name. Hearing Shiratori suddenly call her last name made Kanon freeze again with flushed cheeks. Kanon started acting flustered and eventually nodded with her flushed face. Seeing that reaction, Shiratori was shocked because he only realized what he had just said. Because of the awkward atmosphere, Kanon quickly stood up and excused herself to brush her teeth. Seeing the clock, Shiratori was also shocked because it was almost school time and quickly got ready. Seeing her children, Haruno smiled and asked her husband if she was curious whether the two of them could get along normally. Shiratori's father, in a tone that seemed stiff, replied that maybe they could. After finishing preparations, the two of them left. Of course, with an awkward atmosphere between them. Even when walking, the distance between them was quite wide. Shiratori knew that as siblings, they should go together and shorten the distance between them. Glancing at Kanon, Shiratori became even more resigned when he saw Kanon reading a book while walking again. This made him wonder if Kanon was reading the book for a specific purpose, like so they wouldn't talk. If so, Shiratori felt their situation wouldn't be okay. Because of that, he slowed his pace to walk side by side with Kanon and called her with an honorific or Dono. Hearing that, Kanon immediately furrowed her brow and looked at Shiratori with confused eyes, asking what was up with that name. Shiratori explained that he thought Kanon didn't like it if he didn't use an honorific. Kanon immediately affirmed that normal was best. Shiratori let out a small sigh and asked then he would call her Ijima, but later it would change to Shiratori after their official family papers were done. Hearing that, Kanon's face turned red again, and while covering her face with the book, she replied that Shiratori could call her Kanon. Hearing that, Shiratori immediately accepted it enthusiastically. This shocked Kanon, and her heart wasn't ready yet. Kanon quickly asked if Shiratori would also call her like that at school. The question made Shiratori remember about that. He realized that if their family papers were done this week, then next week the two of them would officially be siblings. But for now, their sibling relationship still felt very awkward. So he also felt that calling Kanon by her last name would definitely make Kanon uncomfortable. Finally, they went to school as usual without any drama. Time passed, and the bell for going home rang. Shiratori went home to his new house. He reflexively knocked on the door and asked permission to enter when opening the door, even though it was now his new home. Entering the house and taking off his shoes, Shiratori admitted that he still wasn't used to this new life. Seeing no other shoes in the shoe area, Shiratori realized that their parents weren't home yet, and Kanon hadn't come home either. When about to enter and planning to change out of his uniform first, his stomach suddenly rumbled, making Shiratori choose to eat something first. Not long after Shiratori thought that, suddenly the front door behind Shiratori opened, and someone bumped into Shiratori from behind quite hard. When turning around, it turned out that the one who bumped into him was Kanon, who came home in a hurry and was already sitting on the floor from the collision. Shiratori was shocked and greeted her in a surprised tone. He then apologized and asked about Kanon's condition while turning his face away because in front of him was a sight he shouldn't see. Kanon nodded and stood up. When Shiratori helped pick up the fallen book, his stomach rumbled quite loudly again, making the atmosphere between them silent. In an innocent tone, Kanon asked if Shiratori was hungry. With flushed cheeks and awkwardness, Shiratori nodded. This made Kanon stare at Shiratori for a few moments with a small smile on her face. This confused Shiratori with her behavior. After changing clothes, Kanon went back downstairs and to the kitchen to make food. After waiting a few moments, a plate of mayonnaise-filled bread was served. Seeing the food shocked Shiratori immensely, and the food looked shining brightly in his eyes. In a hesitant and embarrassed tone, Kanon invited Shiratori to enjoy the food she made. Enthusiastically, Shiratori quickly sat in his chair and said that Kanon's sandwich was amazing, even adding green vegetables. Hearing the praise and exaggerated reaction made Kanon embarrassed and replied that it was just an ordinary sandwich. Shiratori commented again that Kanon really had cooking skills. Without hesitation, Shiratori ate it enthusiastically and thought that the sandwich must taste delicious. On the other hand, Kanon watched Shiratori with a curious face about his reaction. When the first bite entered his mouth, Shiratori paused in shock for a few moments before smiling widely and saying that it tasted very good. This shocked Kanon and made her very happy. Thumbs up, Shiratori said that the sweetness of the egg and mayonnaise really mixed well and tasted very good. Shiratori thanked Kanon for the food, which quite surprised her, and she started smiling happily. Seeing her reaction, Shiratori wondered in his heart if Kanon was now happy enough to make that expression. Kanon then brought her head closer to Shiratori and asked in an embarrassed tone, even though they were a couple at home, but did she pass as a girlfriend? The question shocked Shiratori and almost made him choke. While trying to swallow the food he was chewing, he admitted that he had completely forgotten about that. In an awkward tone and trying to cover his forgetfulness, Shiratori replied that it was impossible to fail if his little sister could cook this well. That answer made Kanon furrow her brow, feeling annoyed with his response because he treated her as a little sister instead of a girlfriend. After finishing his food in a cold tone, Kanon asked if Shiratori wanted a cup of coffee. Hearing her tone shocked Shiratori, and he nodded while thanking her for the food. Kanon walked to the kitchen, and Shiratori wondered in his heart if his diversion answer earlier was too weak. Just as the question ended, Kanon turned with her cold gaze that pierced through. Seeing her expression made Shiratori sure that his answer had made her angry. After a few moments, Kanon returned with a glass of coffee served to Shiratori. Shiratori thanked her, but in his heart, another question arose. Kanon didn't mistakenly put sugar with salt or vinegar, or even poison just because of his earlier answer, right? After drinking it, Shiratori was shocked again, not because the coffee tasted strange, but because it tasted normal. Realizing that, Shiratori let out a sigh of relief and sat on the sofa. On the other hand, Kanon followed him and stood beside him. When Shiratori turned toward her and felt puzzled by her behavior this time, suddenly Kanon sat on the sofa right where Shiratori was sitting. This shocked Shiratori immensely and asked in a surprised and panicked tone what Kanon's action meant. Kanon just stayed silent and bowed her head with her flushed face. Shiratori paused for a few moments before turning his gaze away when he saw something he shouldn't see. Kanon didn't move at all from her position. Because of that, Shiratori moved slowly away. However, that only made Kanon more aggressive and started nudging her head toward Shiratori with an angry and embarrassed expression. Then, in the same tone, Kanon said that because Shiratori forgot their agreement as a couple at home, she would do her best to make Shiratori remember it. Hearing that made Shiratori even more shocked, and his face turned red. He really couldn't believe that Kanon was serious about it, and he thought it was just a joke. Kanon's aggressive movement suddenly stopped, and she started turning her body while still sticking to Shiratori's body. Shiratori was confused about what Kanon would do next, but suddenly Kanon started sniffing Shiratori's body like a cat with her flushed cheeks and serious face. Seeing that, Shiratori became panicked again and asked her to stop sniffing him because he was sweaty from playing basketball earlier at school. However, Kanon casually replied that she didn't mind. Her response made Shiratori even more panicked and shocked. Not long after saying that, Kanon said with an expression like she was already immersed in her thoughts that she liked Shiratori's scent. Her eyes started closing, and she said again that Shiratori's scent made her feel relaxed. Hearing that, Shiratori paused with his still flushed face. It also made him realize that earlier that morning when Kanon suddenly ended up in his blanket was also because of this. Seeing Kanon leaning relaxed on his body made Shiratori also admit that Kanon's scent smelled nice too. After all that, Kanon, sitting on the floor, asked in an awkward tone if her scent smelled nice. Shiratori hesitated to answer, but when he saw Kanon's expression so enthusiastically waiting for his answer, he awkwardly nodded. Kanon looked at Shiratori in a surprised tone because she was happy and suddenly said in a proud tone that she as a house girlfriend had leveled up to level 1. Hearing that, Shiratori quickly stopped her and explained that he had told Kanon before that he had a second-year upperclassman girl he admired. Remembering that, Kanon immediately fell silent while putting on a serious face. Kanon then stood up and said that it didn't matter either, and she would do her best. In her opinion, with Shiratori becoming part of her family, it gave her a chance. Kanon bowed slightly and said that she hoped the two of them could get along well. Kanon then, for the first time, called Shiratori Oniai-chan or brother. This made Shiratori pause, and his cheeks turned red. Not long after, the front door opened, and Haruno had just come home. Seeing them talking made her a bit surprised because she was happy and commented that she felt grateful because her daughter and Shiratori were starting to get close. Kanon, with her serious and happy face, nodded to her mother. On the other hand, Shiratori just stayed silent, still feeling embarrassed to respond due to Kanon's mental attack earlier by calling him brother. A week passed, and the official papers for Shiratori's new family were all sorted. One day at school, someone could be seen seriously writing something on the blackboard using chalk. The person writing was Shiratori's friend with the legendary hairstyle named Rinda. On the other hand, Shiratori's bespectacled friend named Takarada started clapping his hands while asking for attention from all the students in the class. After Rinda finished writing on the blackboard, Takarada loudly called out to Shiratori and Kanon, congratulating them on their marriage. A suddenly ambiguous situation occurred, shocking both of them immensely. Kanon just stood silently beside Shiratori with a flushed face. On the other hand, Shiratori, in a confused and disbelieving tone, said that hadn't he already cleared up the misunderstanding about their situation to Takarada and the others when they were doing homework together? Takarada instead let out a pretend-not-to-hear sound and pretended to be confused. Shiratori sighed and explained again that the ones getting married weren't him, but their parents, his father and Kanon's mother. Takarada shook his head before letting out a long sigh, and explained again in a know-it-all tone that Shiratori didn't understand his new situation at all. Then, in a high and firm tone, he continued that this was about the day when a classmate girl became a little sister, and the two of them lived together under the same roof. In the same tone, Takarada stepped forward while clenching his fist, and asked what Shiratori would call that situation except marriage. Yes, Takarada was just jealous, and even his friend with the legendary hair, Rinda, nodded in agreement. Hearing Takarada's opinion made Kanon embarrassed, her face turning red. On the other hand, Shiratori replied that all of Takarada's explanations just now were full of missing information. Takarada struck a pose adjusting his glasses and walked to the window like a main character, while saying that lately it had been so lively, whether about Shiratori or other things like new friends, a new normal life. Amid the liveliness, he asked Shiratori to let him tease his friend. Takarada turned toward Shiratori and smiled. Shiratori was a bit surprised but also relieved because all this was just a joke from his own friend. When Shiratori thought that, Takarada immediately grinned and said that at least Shiratori could dream and think of it like that. Shiratori was immediately shocked to hear it. Takarada immediately explained enthusiastically with flushed cheeks that just imagine a romantic incident happening at Shiratori's house with Kanon, where Kanon had just come out of the bathroom with a towel hugging her body tightly. After explaining at length, Takarada really immersed himself in explaining it, and even firmly and confidently said that something like that would definitely happen. Hearing his explanation made all the students in the class blush upon imagining it. Even Shiratori and Kanon became embarrassed too. Shiratori scolded him in a high tone and asked him to stop imagining weird scenarios about the two of them. Hearing Shiratori's scolding, instead of stopping, Takarada teased him more by whispering that Shiratori actually hoped that romantic incident would really happen. Shiratori was shocked and immediately brushed off his words by saying that he was a man, so he didn't care what Takarada and the others would talk about him. But he asked them not to look at his family member like that. Takarada laughed and continued teasing Shiratori by imitating a girl's voice and calling him like a little sister. On the other hand, Kanon kept silent, covering her face with her book because she was too embarrassed. Kanon's friends like Sayoki and Nemuko, who were beside her, thought that Kanon might cry because she was being teased like that by Shiratori's friends, but in reality, Kanon smiled with flushed cheeks and even commented that apparently there was a tactic for coming out of the bathroom like that. Yes, Kanon, who heard Takarada's wild thoughts just now, saw it as a good opportunity for her to strengthen their relationship as a couple at home later. However, after saying that, her face suddenly turned red as she felt embarrassed imagining it herself. Seeing Kanon's unusual behavior, Nemuko even asked her about it. But Kanon ignored her because she had fallen into her imagination and instead laughed to herself again, muttering that she understood where staying too long in the bathroom would inevitably lead to such an incident. Yes, they were all shocked to see Kanon's reaction, as she was the one who enjoyed the imagination the most compared to the others. Because of that, Sayoki asked Kanon if she must feel bothered by this, right? Kanon jolted in shock upon snapping back from her thoughts and quickly covered her face again with the book, nodding and replying that it was really troublesome and she felt uncomfortable. However, Kanon said that with a smile on her face, indicating that she actually enjoyed it. Realizing that, Sayoki and Nemuko exchanged glances and nodded together as if their thoughts were on the same wavelength. The two of them then simultaneously linked arms with Kanon and dragged her away with the excuse of inviting her to hang out together after school, leaving just like that. Seeing the three of them made the whole class fall silent in shock. It was worsened by Takarada suddenly commenting in an annoyed tone that what he said just now was true. Shiratori scolded him again and replied that Takarada was completely wrong. In the end, Shiratori managed to calm the commotion in his class. He felt relieved because the atmosphere in the class became conducive again, but for some reason, he felt like he had forgotten something. On the other hand, at the same time, in the school cafeteria area, Nemuko, Sayoki, and Kanon could be seen there. Sayoki, in a confused tone, asked again about what Kanon said earlier, where Kanon mentioned a boyfriend only at home. On the other hand, Namuko looked shocked but also excited after hearing it. Kanon, with her flushed face, averted her gaze in embarrassment and nodded. Sayuki asked again to clarify if what Kanon meant was that both Kanon and Shiratori would treat each other as a couple only when at home. Kanon, with the same expression, nodded again. Sayuki and Namuko paused for a few moments before Sayuki suddenly asked if what Kanon meant was friends with benefits. Sayuki's chatter immediately made Namuko embarrassed, and she scolded her right away. Sayuki sighed and said that she thought they would hear a romantic story from Kanon, but if it was like this, there probably wouldn't be anything like that. On the other hand, upon hearing Sayuki's chatter just now, Kanon only realized it, and her face turned bright red, trying to brush off Sayuki's guess with her hand gestures. Instead of stopping, Sayuki thought of something else, like Shiratori, whom she thought only saw her as a tool, and in her opinion, Shiratori was low for thinking that. Hearing Sayuki's thoughts drifting further, Kanon started to panic and tried to stop Sayuki's bad chatter about Shiratori. Because her voice was too soft, Sayuki didn't stop. Because of that, Kanon had no choice but to launch her hand to Sayuki's mouth to stop her. In an embarrassed and soft tone, Kanon replied that Shiratori wasn't bad. In fact, she was the one using his weakness to take advantage of the situation. All the incidents were completely accidental, where the person she liked had now become part of her family. Besides, Shiratori already had someone he liked, so in her opinion, at least only at home could she be his girlfriend. Hearing that, they fell silent and exchanged glances again. Namuko then approached Kanon and gently patted her head, which surprised Kanon herself. Namuko even suddenly hugged her like a big sister calming her little sister. Of course, this shocked Kanon and confused her with the action. Namuko didn't say a word and just smiled, looking at Kanon. Reaching into her pocket, Namuko suddenly gave a snack to Kanon, which confused her upon receiving it. Sayuki even commented that Namuko was acting like a grandmother calming her grandchild, and that Namuko always spoiled Kanon quickly. Hearing that, Namuko didn't take it as an insult and instead approached Sayuki, giving her the same snack and saying that she liked Sayuki too. As a friend, of course. After giving both of them snacks, Namuko turned to Kanon and, with a serious face, suggested telling all her classmates about Kanon's situation and her feelings as a couple at home. Kanon was very shocked by Namuko's suggestion. After swallowing the food in her mouth, Kanon paused for a few moments before explaining that in her opinion, Namuko's suggestion was too much because the girl Shiratori liked might be one of the girls from second year, and if she told all her friends about the situation, it would make it hard for Shiratori to express his feelings to the girl he liked, and in her opinion, that wasn't fair. Sayuki and Namuko fell silent again before Namuko slammed the table and, in a serious tone, suggested that Kanon had to make her first move because, in her opinion, love wouldn't wait for them. Love had to be pursued by them. Namuko held both of Kanon's shoulders and reaffirmed that Kanon shouldn't just wait and open her mouth like a baby bird being fed by its mother. Besides, 15 years might pass in the blink of an eye if Shiratori kept treating Kanon like a little sister, and she suggested attacking when the time came. Although Kanon struggled with her inner self over the suggestion given by her friend, in the end, Kanon stood from her chair with a serious face. Seeing that, Sayuki reflexively asked if Kanon was going to the bathroom. With her serious face, Kanon replied that she was going to the bathroom, but she would also go to tell everyone. Hearing that, Sayuki suggested going to the bathroom first. Just as she was suggested, Kanon instead ran while saying she would go to the class. Yes, she completely ignored Sayuki's suggestion. Seeing that, Namuko intended to follow her and go with Kanon to the class, but because Kanon ran so fast, she just stood there smiling. On the other hand, Sayuki stared at Namuko and remembered Namuko's earlier words about the estimated time passing for 15 years, and in her opinion, the estimate was too accurate and made her curious. Because of that, she decided to ask about it to Namuko another time. Not long after, in Class 1B, Kanon arrived there and immediately opened the classroom door with her serious and slightly awkward face. There, Shiratori and his two besties could be seen chatting, and when seeing Kanon, Shiratori reflexively called her by her usual name. Kanon walked into the class with an awkward expression, not only because of the embarrassment of not being used to being called like that, but also awkward about what she was going to do. Shiratori also walked toward her and asked for time to talk with Kanon. Hearing that, the duo who caused the most commotion immediately put on shocked and excited expressions, because once again, the liveliness that was chaotic earlier was about to happen again. Shiratori whispered that he wanted to discuss their relationship as a couple at home. Kanon, who also had the same topic, nodded and whispered back that she had the same topic and continued walking to the teacher's desk in the class. Shiratori was of course confused by his little sister's behavior. With a tense and flushed face, Kanon stood there and slammed the desk, immediately drawing the attention of all the students in the class. Everyone fell silent and stared at her in confusion. Kanon took a deep breath before immediately saying clearly that she, Shiratori Kanon, had now become Shiratori's little sister. Right when about to continue her second sentence, Shiratori, who was shocked and realized what his little sister was going to do, with 1,000 quick steps, pulled Kanon, carried her like an item, and ran as fast as possible out of the class. At first, the students didn't feel anything strange and just thought the two of them looked so close and a bit unique. However, for a brain full of imagination like Takarada, it meant something else. His brain immediately assumed that the reason Shiratori stopped her just now was because he was trying to hide something important. Unusually, his guess was correct. Takarada guessed again that maybe what Shiratori was trying to hide was something adult, and asked for his opinion from his partner Rinda. Rinda, who rarely spoke, paused to think about it first before nodding and giving a thumbs up, showing his confidence and agreement with Takarada's thought just now. With that, Takarada enthusiastically invited Rinda to quickly chase the new siblings. Once again, the liveliness happened again by that deadly duo. On the other hand, Seiyuki and Nemuko, who weren't far from the entrance and saw the incident, stood silent in the hallway. Seiyuki asked Nemuko if this would be okay. Before she could answer, suddenly a teacher's voice appeared and commented that Class 1B was really causing a commotion. Hearing the teacher's voice, only Nemuko was truly shocked. Nemuko quickly turned and called the teacher with the honorific Chan and also sensei, showing that Nemuko had a close relationship with the teacher enough to add Chan to the teacher. Of course, this surprised Seiyuki a bit. On the other hand, the teacher named Shiro immediately lightly hit Nemuko's head with her book while scolding her by saying to call her Mr. Matsumi. Nemuko nodded resignedly to her request. Before leaving, Shiro the teacher patted Nemuko's head and asked her to go home soon. For a few moments, Nemuko's cheeks turned red, and in an embarrassed and slightly annoyed tone while stroking her head, she muttered that she wasn't a little kid anymore. Seeing the closeness between them made Seiyuki grin after understanding the reason why Nemuko's earlier words felt accurate. Seiyuki called her, making Nemuko jolt and turn toward her. In a mischievous tone, Seiyuki asked if Nemuko didn't feel uncomfortable when someone not too close patted her head. The question immediately made Nemuko's face turn red because she only realized it. Seiyuki laughed softly and invited her to look for the new siblings together. On the other hand, the enthusiastic duo, aka Takarada and Rinda, were really trying hard to find Shiratori and Kanon's whereabouts. Takarada even spread his wild thoughts to other friends to find their location. When the duo approached a small room that seemed like a club room and opened the door, they didn't find them there. When Takarada thought their targets weren't in the room, his instinct said otherwise, and he walked in approaching a small cabinet. Takarada immediately tried to open the small cabinet, but it was hard to open. Funnily, the bespectacled one's instinct was really sharp and correct that inside the small cabinet, Shiratori and Kanon were there. Shiratori himself was trying hard to hold the door from inside so it couldn't be opened. Seeing Takarada struggling to open it, Rinda with his unique non-speaking way whispered his thought to Takarada, where in his opinion, maybe their targets inside the small cabinet were holding the door from inside so it couldn't be opened. Takarada immediately replied that it was too cliché a reason to happen. Hearing their conversation made Shiratori nod, hoping they would leave with that assumption. And yes, once again, Takarada with his sharp instinct nodded in agreement with Rinda's thought where that could happen, and now they just needed to wait instead of forcing it open. Yes, a decision that was very disadvantageous to Shiratori and Kanon, making both of them shocked inside the cabinet. The deadly duo and their friends really waited for Shiratori and Kanon there, waiting while laughing cheerfully. On the other hand, Shiratori sighed and muttered softly that they had no choice but to wait until the two of them left. Silence emerged between them. When Kanon made a slight sound, Shiratori immediately quickly covered Kanon's mouth with his hand and asked her not to make a sound because he was sure the deadly duo would get bored and leave. On the other hand, Kanon, who was being covered, was of course shocked. After a few moments, Kanon then explained what she intended to do earlier. Hearing the explanation made Shiratori shocked and commented softly that Kanon was too barbaric by planning to tell everyone about their couple-like relationship at home. Hearing that, Kanon pouted and immediately lightly bit Shiratori's finger where his hand was still covering her mouth. Shiratori was a bit shocked seeing it mixed with cuteness upon seeing his little sister's behavior, even though he didn't understand it. Kanon also suddenly licked the bitten finger, which immediately made Shiratori's face turn red and asked her to stop playing with him. Instead of obeying, Kanon stared at Shiratori with furrowed brows and a pout, which immediately shocked Shiratori again. Understanding that his little sister was stubborn, Shiratori sighed and asked if Kanon was okay telling something as private as that to her classmates because people might start thinking Kanon was promiscuous. Shiratori emphasized that now they were one family, and he didn't want others to look at his little sister from that angle. He asked Kanon to let him protect her, even though the deadly duo didn't mean harm or anything. They just loved discussing things like that. After saying that, Kanon suddenly turned around and dropped her body toward Shiratori, shocking him. When Shiratori thought his little sister was touched or something after hearing his words just now, in reality, Kanon put on a panicked and desperate face with her hand holding her skirt tightly. In a soft and overwhelmed tone, Kanon called Shiratori, Oni-chan, and told him that she really needed to pee, and it would leak soon. Yes, Kanon was careless because her initial intention was to go to the bathroom earlier, but went to the class instead. Instantly, Shiratori's body froze upon hearing it in shock. He was so shocked that Shiratori even asked to confirm it. Since there was no bottle or anything in the cabinet, Shiratori asked her to hold it a bit longer. With her puffed cheeks while Kanon held it with all her might made Shiratori even more worried, because it was clear on her face that she was really at the edge. Seeing his little sister overwhelmed, Shiratori used a method he actually didn't want to do. He hugged Kanon and let her inhale his scent, explaining that Kanon had once said his body scent could make her feel calm, and because of that, he hoped it could help Kanon hold on a little longer. But in reality, no. Kanon gripped Shiratori's uniform tightly and in a soft tone told him that a little had come out. Yes, the scent didn't work at all. Shiratori became more panicked, especially since he was annoyed because the deadly duo was really still there and even chatting very enjoyably. Because he was starting to be cornered, Shiratori asked again if Kanon still wanted to tell her classmates. Kanon immediately shook her head in panic. Shiratori was about to tell his plan when they got out of this cabinet and told the deadly duo. But Kanon cut him off and said it would be bad if she moved a little and it might leak. Hearing that, Shiratori had no other choice. Suddenly, Shiratori came out very quickly from inside the cabinet to the point that the deadly duo and their friends almost didn't notice. There was even the sound of Shiratori's hurried steps in the hallway. Hearing that made the deadly duo confused whether they should chase again or not. Although hesitant, they really chose to chase again, making Shiratori, who was running, annoyed because they never gave up. Shiratori's main goal now was to head to the women's bathroom. When his destination was in front of his eyes, without hesitation, Shiratori threw Kanon's body that he was carrying like a Pokemon ball missile toward the women's bathroom. And yes, it went in one throw. In a panting tone, the deadly duo and their friends who had just arrived said that this was as far as the two of them could run from them. Hearing that, Shiratori, also panting from running, turned around and put on a serious face while saying that right now Kanon was busy, and if they had something to talk about, he would entertain them. Instantly, the atmosphere became awkward, full of confusion and ambiguity from Shiratori's words just now. On the other hand, Kanon, who successfully released her life's burden, was washing her hands in the bathroom. The next day, in the afternoon after the study session ended, the teaching teacher before leaving asked the student on duty to fill the class journal, or Gakyu Nishi, today to submit the class journal. Coincidentally, that day it was Kanon's turn to get the task. Filling out the format in the journal book, Kanon accidentally wrote her old family name, Ijima. This made Kanon a bit shocked for writing her name wrong and changed it to Shiratori Kanon. That simple thing made Kanon initially look excited and happy before then feeling embarrassed herself, and in the end, she smiled to herself. On a bright morning, Shiratori had just washed his face and was looking in the mirror, noticing a pimple on his forehead. Not long after, Haruno came and greeted him with her gentle smile. Haruno praised Shiratori for waking up earlier than usual and asked permission to use the mirror with him. Shiratori didn't refuse and allowed her to share the mirror. Because of that, their bodies were now close, and as a boy, Shiratori's heart naturally pounded even though he knew she was his new mother. While wiping his face, Shiratori wondered to himself if the scent he smelled was a floral or fruity perfume coming from Haruno. Haruno looked quite serious while looking in the mirror and muttered to herself that the hole for her earring felt strange today. Brushing her hair away from her ear, Haruno started using her earring to clarify the hole in her ear. On the other hand, watching his mother's activity made his face slightly red. Shiratori knew that if this continued, nothing good would happen for him. Amid his confusion about what excuse to use to leave, suddenly Haruno accidentally dropped her earring into the sink. Seeing that, Shiratori quickly picked it up and gave it back to Haruno, then hurriedly said goodbye. Leaving the bathroom, Shiratori let out a long sigh because he felt that this morning had already been so heavy for him. Upon arriving at school, Takarada and Rinda looked shocked seeing Shiratori's condition as he just arrived in class. Shiratori looked out of breath while dropping his head onto the desk weakly. Seeing that, Takarada asked if Shiratori ran from home to here. Why wasn't Shiratori's house quite close to school? Shiratori didn't answer, and instead said in a weak tone that his body now felt less sharp and not as strong as before. Letting out a long sigh, Shiratori remembered that it had been 8 years since his mother passed away, and during that time, he had only lived with his father. Suddenly, another voice emerged trying to guess Shiratori's thoughts, and said in a tone, as if entering Shiratori's perspective, that now his situation of living with a stepmother and stepsister coincided with his rapidly growing maturity hormones, and now that was being toyed with by them. Yes, that was Takarada's voice, the one with the wildest imagination. Takarada then smiled widely and said that the last time they discussed this topic, Shiratori was the lucky pervert. Shiratori just stayed silent with his face paling. Seeing that reaction made Takarada's smile freeze, and he immediately approached while asking in a serious tone, "Wait, seriously?" Shiratori just turned his face away before firmly brushing off Takarada's wild thoughts with a flushed face. Suddenly, Takarada told Shiratori that his little sister had arrived. However, seeing Kanon's expression shocked them, and they quickly told Shiratori that Kanon was glaring at him. Of course, Shiratori was surprised to hear it, and when he turned toward Kanon, it was true that Kanon was glaring at Shiratori with a face almost crying. Instantly, Shiratori realized that 20 minutes ago, when they left for school together, he suddenly ran because he was too embarrassed, leaving Kanon far behind. Seeing his reaction, suddenly as usual, the deadly duo gave thumbs up toward Shiratori, and in a mischievous tone with his wild thoughts, Takarada suggested to Shiratori that if he still had energy left, he should use that energy in the club later. Understanding that, Shiratori immediately brushed off his thoughts by saying that he just wanted to help the student council members' activities. Remembering that, Shiratori realized he forgot to go to the student council room to help his admired upperclassmen because he left in a hurry earlier. Because of that, he decided to visit the student council room later. On the other hand, Kanon kept staring at Shiratori with a confused expression. Time passed, and night arrived. Inside the house, Haruno could be seen just coming out of the bathroom. Coincidentally, Shiratori also just came out of another room. Coincidentally, Shiratori noticed that Haruno slipped, making him quickly run toward her to help, but instead ended up with Shiratori being fallen on by Haruno. Haruno felt guilty and apologized because in her opinion, Shiratori's fall must have hurt, especially since she heard a quite loud impact sound when falling. Haruno smiled and thanked him for protecting her when she slipped earlier. Shiratori's face started turning red, not knowing where to look, and began to panic. On the other hand, in their position right now, Shiratori's father and Kanon could be seen peeking their heads a little, watching the two of them from the edge of the door to another room. His father's facial expression looked annoyed, while Kanon looked shocked and disbelieving at what she saw. His father even said in a disbelieving tone that Haruno was cheating in their own house, and considered this as a war between him and Shiratori himself. Hearing that, Shiratori became panicked and immediately defended himself that the two of them misunderstood. Likewise, Haruno explained to Kanon that she fell because she slipped. However, unfortunately, there was another incident that shouldn't have happened, making his father and Kanon even more shocked, and that night became lively. After all the incidents that felt like very heavy trials, Shiratori sat silently in his room while playing with his phone, feeling tired from all the trials. Looking toward the open window, Shiratori saw a small spider on the window. Seeing that, Shiratori asked where it came from and also if the small spider was male. Using his finger to guide the small spider onto his hand, Shiratori suddenly commented in a dramatic tone that males had a hard life based on his daily experiences. Without Shiratori realizing, the small spider was female. Not long after, Kanon's voice could be heard calling Shiratori from outside his room. Reflexively, this made Shiratori immediately respond and ask what was up. Kanon then suddenly opened the door and entered shyly. Kanon entered wearing only a towel, making Shiratori freeze in shock to the point that his hand accidentally squeezed where the small spider was. "Rest in peace, small spider." Kanon then, in an awkward but forced natural tone, said that she forgot to change clothes. Because he was fed up with all the heavy trials, Shiratori immediately pushed Kanon out of his room and emphasized that Kanon's room was next door, not here. However, instead of leaving, Kanon braked with her feet and immediately ran back into Shiratori's room and jumped onto his bed. Kanon lay on the bed with a flushed face, but trying hard to ignore her embarrassment. On the other hand, in Shiratori's head, Takarada's voice suddenly appeared pretending to be Kanon, saying that it wasn't fair if only Mother got all the moments, and she should be the one getting those moments as his girlfriend. Shiratori panicked immensely after Takarada's voice appeared in his head. In the end, because he didn't want to prolong the problem, Shiratori approached her and covered her with his blanket, patting her body while putting her to sleep like a child. Realizing that, Kanon quickly got up and emphasized in an embarrassed tone that she came here not to sleep, and because she was too embarrassed, Kanon ended up saying unclear sentences. Kanon's face turned even redder when about to explain the purpose of her visit, but it ended up with her continuously letting out cute confused sounds and unclear words because of her embarrassment. In the end, Kanon left his room because she was too embarrassed, and it turned out the small spider didn't end up in Shiratori's hand and was released back through the window. Goodbye, small spider. Not long after, Haruno suddenly came and asked Shiratori if something happened because she heard a commotion in Shiratori's room. Hearing Haruno's voice suddenly appear made Shiratori freeze again in shock and showed his surprise by calling her. Haruno smiled and explained her visit to bring Shiratori's clean clothes. Shiratori thanked her and accepted the freshly washed clothes. Once again, Shiratori averted his gaze, confused about where to look. Realizing that, Haruno called him, making Shiratori immediately turn around in embarrassment and apologize. Understanding that, Haruno smiled and said that she had lived in this house with Kanon for a long time, so she was a bit negligent about things like this and apologized to Shiratori. Shiratori felt guilty and intended to brush it off, but Haruno said again that to not disturb Shiratori, she felt she had to change her clothes that weren't too casual like this. Because he didn't want to trouble her, with a flushed face, Shiratori didn't mind it and asked his mother to be herself as usual. Hearing that made Haruno smile and say goodbye to Shiratori. When Shiratori went to store his clothes, he let out a sigh of relief and thought that Haruno was quite easy to adapt to, so at least it was still considered safe. However, before leaving, Haruno commented that she felt happy having a reliable man around here, and that made her lower her guard. This made Shiratori freeze again while watching Haruno leave. Looking at the clothes delivered by Haruno, Shiratori realized that his clothes now smelled of fresh detergent and fabric softener, and Haruno even folded his clothes so neatly that he couldn't imitate it. Because of that, Shiratori planned to ask to be taught how to fold clothes neatly like Haruno and felt happy living with a woman. The next day, Shiratori told Kanon that today he would go to the student council room. Hearing that, Kanon was shocked while reading the book in her hand. Shiratori nodded and added that because of that, he might come home a bit late. Kanon looked panicked and commented that she had never heard about this before. Without them realizing, behind them was a girl with long black hair who was none other than Kanoka. Kanoka sneaked before suddenly hugging Shiratori from behind and saying in a happy tone that she successfully caught Shiratori. This shocked Kanon greatly, as well as Shiratori, who even dropped his bag. Turning toward the back, Shiratori was shocked because he couldn't believe his admired upperclassman was around here. Kanoka smiled and waved her hand while saying that it had been a long time since they met. Shiratori then asked Kanoka why she was in the first-year classroom like his. Kanoka, in a cute tone, said that she had been waiting for Shiratori for quite a while since the new student acceptance ceremony, and Shiratori hadn't come yet. Shiratori looked shocked upon hearing it. Kanoka suddenly brought her face closer to Shiratori, shocking him and asking what was up. Kanoka smiled and replied while patting Shiratori's head that she had thought this, that Shiratori had really grown in many ways. Hearing the praise made Shiratori feel happy, and his face slightly red. Then, in an excited tone, Kanoka said that because of that, she could hand over her tasks to Shiratori. Shiratori immediately fell silent after hearing it, knowing that Kanoka would make him work very hard. On the other hand, Kanon, watching their closeness, could only stay silent and say in her heart that the two of them were too close. Kanon then walked slowly and approached Shiratori from behind with her embarrassed face. Seeing that, Kanoka was a bit surprised and asked with a smile on her face to Shiratori if Kanon was Shiratori's new little sister. Hearing the question shocked Shiratori, and he asked back how Kanoka knew. Kanoka laughed and replied that she just knew from rumors. Kanoka smiled gently and bowed a little, lifting her skirt slightly like giving a princess-like greeting, and introduced herself to Kanon as Sasahara Kanoka from Class 2A, the one who stole Shiratori's first kiss. Hearing that shocked Kanon immensely to the point that her mouth gaped wide open in surprise.